As I readied myself to make the shift from an exclusively spiritual being into the world of particles in 1939, I had the following conversation with the creative intelligence I'll call God. God, what would you like to accomplish on this journey you're about to undertake? Me, I'd like to teach self-reliance, compassion, and forgiveness. God, are you certain that this is what you wish to dedicate this entire lifetime to? Me, yes, I can see the need even more clearly now. God, well then I think we'd better put your little ass into a series of foster homes and have you stay there for a decade or so, where you'll learn to experience relying upon yourself, and we'll remove your parents so that you won't be dissuaded from your mission. Me, I'll accept that, but what about my parents? Who will best facilitate my life's purpose? God, you can select Melvin Lyle Dyer as your father, a prisoner, an alcoholic, and a thief. He'll abandon you as a baby and never show up in your life. You'll first practice hating him and seeking revenge, but you'll ultimately forgive him long after he's left his body. This act of forgiveness will be the single most important event of your life. It will put you on the path that you're signing up for. Me. And my mother? What about her? Take Hazel Dyer, Lyle's wife. Her compassion for all of her children will give you an example to follow. She'll steadfastly work herself to the bone to reunite you and your brothers after 10 years or so of her own suffering. Me. Isn't it an awful, cruel fate for my father? God. Not at all. He signed up for this 25 years ago. He dedicated this entire lifetime to teach one of his children the lesson of forgiveness. A noble gesture, wouldn't you say? And your mother is here to show you how true compassion shows up every day. Now get down there and participate in becoming a particle. In the introduction of my book, You'll See It When You Believe It, I wrote about finding my father and visiting his grave in the early 1970s. The facts that led me there defy the laws of logic, and visiting it was the final hurdle I needed to overcome before initiating my writing and speaking career, or the mission I'd signed up for back in 1939. I've also visited the Holocaust sites of Europe and read and reread the history of events that contributed to the hatred that created war. In the 1960s, I worked to bring peace to the events surrounding the horrible Vietnam War, and today my attention is often focused on finding an alternative to the violence and hatred in Africa, the Middle East, and particularly Iraq. My calling is deep within me and has a hold on me. I don't know what I'm going to do next, but I'm probably being guided by what Spirit and I decided at the inception of this journey. One thing I know for certain is that I'm inspired. I've described my personal insight about my calling to encourage all of you to examine your own life, including all of its travails and success, as a necessary experience in order to fulfill your mission. Looking at life from this perspective nurtures the deep yearning within that will beckon you back to Spirit. As you can see from my own example, it can be a great help to look at your entire life as the unfolding of a plan that you participated in before you even arrived here. By doing so, you shift from blaming others and circumstances to being responsible and feeling your purpose. Whatever shows up in your life then becomes a part of the perfection of this plan. When everything you experience seems unwelcome, for instance, you can search for what you gain from the apparent obstacles. If we can remember that we're responsible for what we're attracting, we can then eliminate the negative energy we wallow in. If what we desire is to be inspired and feel joy, but the opposite keeps showing up, rather than cursing fate, we can view ourselves as simply being out of creative vibrational alignment. We can shift our vibrations in the form of thoughts to those that are more harmonious with our desires, and we can then begin to take the small steps necessary for our inspiration to be sensed. Source energy will cooperate with us when we seek it energetically. Moreover, we can begin to reassess our lives for misaligned attractions and imagined bad luck. When we feel peaceful within ourselves, we begin to attract more of the peace we desire because we're functioning from a spiritual place of peace. When we engage Spirit, we regain the power of our ultimate source. Regardless of what goes on in the world of form, inside of ourselves, we'd still be living in Spirit. For example, a beggar on a street corner may have agreed to come into this world of boundaries to teach and generate the awareness that leads to more compassion in this world, or even to teach a single person, perhaps you, to become more compassionate. In an infinite universe, there's no time restrictions on how many lifetimes we get. With an infinity before us, spending one lifetime teaching compassion doesn't seem so outrageous. When we feel peaceful within, we begin to attract more of the peace we desire because we're functioning from a spiritual place of peace. When we engage spirit, we regain the power of our ultimate source. An inspirational attitude is less judgmental and more appreciative, with a keen eye for how God or source energy manifests. And remember, source can't be removed from what it creates. Everyone and everything contains God or the source, so be on the lookout for the God force in every living thing. Explore how this force has delivered to us many blessings in disguise. We came from a world of pure spirit and allowed that source to take over without any interference or questioning on our part. As long as we were in spirit, our source materialized in a multitude of ways to handle everything for us. Then, almost immediately after our birth into form, we initiated a program to deny spirit and emphasize the ego. But now, as you listen to these words, you're on the threshold of dropping ego identity and returning to a life where inspiration awaits you.
To understand that you have a higher self and to know it and be aware of it is one thing, but to trust it in it is quite something else. And the ways to put this principle into practice are, first of all, to keep in mind that you cannot go to a higher ground if you're hanging on to a lower level. That in order to get yourself to a higher place, a place of trust, you have to somehow recognize that all of the stuff that's going on in your life in a lower place is something you have to let go of. You have to trust that when you do let go, you're not going to be falling into the abyss. And I would recommend that you take a real rebellious attitude toward the philosophy which preaches that you are not connected to the divine energy, that somehow this force that has many names is something that is outside of you, and you're not deserving of it. Until you know that you can trust in it, you can't use it and acknowledge it in your life. One of the things to do to practice this trust is to take the most serious problem that you have and turn it over to God. Affirm to yourself, I would like to show my trust in the divine force by simply turning my problems over to your divine hands. I can remember doing this with some of the things that I really struggled with at one time in my life, things that I just thought I couldn't get past. I remember going through relationship difficulties. I remember going through problems with drinking and things like this, where it just seemed like I wanted to get past it and I just didn't know quite what to do. I can remember times when I would be stuck in my writing and not sure whether I could, and I would just stop and I would just say, all right, I'm going to turn this over. I'm going to trust. I'm going to trust. I'm going to surrender. And this concept of surrender is very, very important. So when you do this, it's just that simple act of getting down on your knees and staying there on your knees and just say, okay, I'm going to turn this over to something that is higher within myself. And the ego seems to go away and the solution seems to be there for you. The presence of complete trust is evident in your life when you start to think and feel and do are all balanced and they're all in harmony. This is called congruence. If you're congruent, your thoughts and your feelings and your behavior are all in harmony. If you're incongruent, you have one thought about, gee, I'd like to be able to do this, but then you feel another way about it, and then you act in a completely different way. And this is the cause of most of the struggles in our life, and it's also the thing that impedes the free flow of the divine force into your life. You have to trust in yourself. When you're trusting in yourself, you're trusting in this very wisdom that is the source of your life. And when you are congruent within and are feeling congruent, you are also beginning to act congruent. So work on congruency and look at the areas in your life in which you feel yourself to be incongruent. What do I think about this, and how do I feel, and how do I act? And try to bring them into harmony. And you'll start accessing this trust that is absolutely essential to the manifesting process. And of course, as always, you have to begin a meditation practice of contemplating the supreme principle which is beyond the pettiness of this world. And as you meditate and go within and you make conscious contact with God, God isn't something that you know about any longer. God is something that you know directly and personally. And once you have this direct conscious contact, this knowing, then trust is not anything that you'll ever have to work on again. You'll have the knowing, you'll have banished the doubt. In your silent moments of prayer, I would recommend that you're not afraid to ask for help, because what you're asking for is a more direct communication and dialogue with God, which is, of course, a part of what you are already in the first place. so that God is not this giant vending machine in the sky who's dispensing goodies to you, but God is a part of you that you are in dialogue with, and you ask for that, and you'll find yourself achieving it. I'd also recommend that you practice a 2 or 3 day regimen of just having unconditionally loving thoughts and nothing else towards one particular person in your life, whoever that might be, maybe one of your children or your in-laws or one of your spouse, or maybe someone you're struggling with or having a difficult time in communicating. And just practice, say, for this day and this day only, I am going to practice everything, no matter what they say or how they say it, I'm just going to respond internally with unconditional love. I'm not going to allow any negativity there. And watch how that relationship changes. Remind yourself that love transforms, that unconditional love is healing, that it heals the body and it heals the mind. And if you have this kind of approach to your life and don't put conditions on it, then you'll find yourself feeling much more peaceful, and you'll sleep better, and you'll enjoy your friends and neighbors more, and your prosperity will increase, because unconditional love is the same as having peace within yourself. Remember, the opposite of love is really fear. Every time you experience fear, ask yourself, what's going on that I've substituted fear here for love in this moment? And the fear that we have that we're not complete, or that we're alone, which is the number one fear that all human beings seem to suffer from, is that the fear of being alone. Once you've transcended that fear of being alone, you begin to recognize you're never alone. You always have divine guidance. You're always connected to this divine principle that is universal. That means it's everywhere, which means it's no place that it's not, which means, of course, that it's within you. So you substitute that fear when you accept unconditional love into your life. It goes away.
Every book of the Bible has been calibrated. All of the great songs have been calibrated. The calibration goes like this. Over here to my left is a calibration of 0. And as far as I can go on this stage, let's say up to the speaker, represents 1,000, the energy level of 1,000 to here. All right. Now, anything that goes up to number 200 on this scale that I'm just arbitrarily giving to you, let's say 200 is right here, represents something called force. And every thought and every emotion that you have that calibrates between 0 and 200 is a thought or an emotion that weakens you in one way or another and lowers the energy field. And those calibrations, those thoughts, I'll give you the number 20 is the lowest, and the thought is shame. And this, by the way, is a 29-year study that was conducted over almost his entire professional lifetime. This is a medical doctor and a PhD researcher as well. At 30, we're moving up now. 30 is guilt, 50 is apathy, grief, fear, desire, anger, until we reach approximately 200. Now, every energy that is below 200 is an energy that when you have that thought, the thoughts of humiliation, of blame, of despair, of anxiety, of hatred, of scorn, any of these kinds of thoughts, these thoughts are in what he calls force. And whenever you use force as a way of communicating, a way of talking, a way of being, you create, the problem is that we create a counterforce. And that people who calibrate below 200 in their lives, and anyone can be calibrated at any time. Even photographs can be calibrated. The photograph on the cover of A Spiritual Solution to Every Problem calibrates around 580. And it was a picture that was taken in Assisi after just an astonishing miracle had happened in my life. You have to, it's almost like I said yesterday, you have to willingly suspend your disbelief. You have to do a somersault into the inconceivable and allow yourself to open up to the possibility that every thought that you have and every emotion that you have and every internal experience that you have has an impact not only on you, but as I'll demonstrate to you in a few moments, on everyone that you encounter in your life and everything that you encounter in your life and whatever energy field that you radiate to. So we're talking 0 to 200, but this scale isn't a scale that is consistent all the way through. When you get to a number of 600, which represents extremely high energy, you were talking about maybe a few thousand people on the entire planet, Earth, today, out of the 6 billion or so of us who reach this level of consciousness of 600. When we're talking about moving into 700 and 800, we're talking about the greatest spiritual masters who've ever walked among us. People who live at the level of the ineffable, who are unconditional love, and have what Patanjali says, he said, when you become steadfast in your abstention of thoughts of harm directed toward others, listen to that again, when you become steadfast in your thoughts of harm directed toward others, all living creatures will cease to feel enmity in your presence. If you're steadfast in abstaining from a thought of harm, and never ever have a thought of harm or judgment directed toward others, because you have to know that when you judge another, you do not define them. You define yourself as someone who needs to judge. Calling someone else stupid or foolish or evil or whatever does not make them that. That just says something about you who needs to put those kind of labels on other people. So that if you can become steadfast and become an individual who never, but never has a thought of harm directed toward others or judgment, which is almost impossible for all of us who live at these ego levels that we've been conditioned to live at. But if you can conceive of yourself as being someone like that, all living creatures will cease to feel enmity in your presence. St. Francis of Assisi is someone who calibrated in the 900s. Maybe 7 or 8 people in the history of the world have calibrated above 950. Francesco's, in fact, the city just to the north of us, about 40 miles, was named after this little man, St. Francis, who left his worldly belongings behind and just took out to save the church. And he spent the last 2 years of his life up in a place that I visited with my wife a few years ago when I took a group of people to Assisi at Mount Suribasso. And the last 2 years of his life, he had to have his hands and his feet and his side bound so that he didn't bleed to death. Such was the energy level of this being. Hawkins suggests that any person who calibrates at 600 or higher, Mother Teresa calibrated at 600. When Mother Teresa walked into a radio studio where I was on the radio that morning, everyone in the room felt her presence. She weighed about 90 pounds. It's about 4'10". And she radiated out a different kind of an energy. And he suggests in Power versus Force, with his academic and research background, that anyone who can raise their calibration level to the level of 600 or higher, everyone in that energy field is automatically healed. Disease cannot survive when you are around that kind of energy. They said of Jesus, his presence in the village and nothing more would raise the consciousness of those around him. He suggests that only one person in the history of humanity has ever reached this level of 1,000, and that was Jesus of Nazareth.
Choosing to experience peace by focusing on what you are for. You can experience peace by balancing all that transpires around you with God consciousness. There's nothing that requires you to react to evil doing with a non-spiritual mental response. You have a choice to put your mental energy into what you desire, and in so doing, create a new world. Let me tell you how I choose to respond to the bombardment of messages that focus on what's wrong in the world. First, I remind myself that for every act of evil, there are a million acts of kindness. I choose to believe that people are essentially good, and that by staying in this belief system, I help bring more of this consciousness to fruition. When enough of us take on this notion, we'll learn to live collectively in this peaceful awareness. Secondly, I know for certain that no amount of hatred in my heart will ever bring about peace. hatred will only contribute more to the presence of those human-made destructive energies. So I choose to place my attention on what I am for, and on my feeling good. I support peace, not war. As Albert Einstein once remarked, I am not only a pacifist, but a militant pacifist. Nothing will end war unless the people themselves refuse to go to war. Unquote. I, as a recipient of the Einstein Award from the Albert Einstein College of Medicine of Yeshiva University, would humbly add, and unless people refuse to ever think warlike thoughts. In Long Walk to Freedom, Nelson Mandela wrote, "To make peace with an enemy, one must work with that enemy, and that enemy becomes one's partner." I know that we are all partners with each other. This is how I think. And when I see footage of a world that's in disarray, because many have forgotten this, I still choose to know that we'll ultimately learn to live this way collectively. But it begins with each of us refusing to be instruments of non-peace in all of our thoughts and consequently all of our behaviors. Adolf Hitler's designated successor, Hermann Göring, is quoted in Nuremberg Diary as saying, "Why, of course the people don't want war. But after all, it's the leaders of the country who determine the policy, and it's always a simple matter to drag the people along, whether it's a democracy or a fascist dictatorship or a parliament or a communist dictatorship. Voice or no voice, the people can always be brought to the bidding of the leaders. That is easy. All you have to do is tell them that they're being attacked and denounce the pacifists for lack of patriotism and exposing the country to danger. It works the same way in any country." That was Hermann Göring. I choose not to be one of those people who are dragged along. I refuse to be brought to the bidding of any leader who attempts to convince me that my beliefs in peace make me unpatriotic. When an unidentified Pentagon official was asked why the U.S. military censored graphic footage from the Gulf War, he responded, "If we let people see that kind of thing, there would never again be any war." Well, that's my goal. To live in a world where warlike thoughts are impossible because we're placing all of our mental energy on what we are for rather than on what we hate. Former President Dwight Eisenhower, who was also a commander of the Allies in World War II, once remarked, "Every gun that is made, every warship launched, every rocket fired signifies, in the final sense, a theft from those who hunger and are not fed, those who are cold and are not clothed. This world in arms is not spending money alone. It is spending the sweat of its laborers, the genius of its scientists, the hopes of its children. This is not a way of life at all in any true sense." This is a call to get ourselves and our world in balance. Peace demands heroic thinking and a purity of conscience. Third, when I see and hear evil, I remind myself, I didn't sign up to come here to be a part of hatred. While others obviously have, I'll remember to stay with the inner sense of peace that calls to me, and I'll surround those who behave in evil ways with the same light energy. I simply refuse to go to war in my thoughts. I choose to be a beacon of light for the places of darkness that are bereft of this kind of illuminating energy. Finally, as the dispatches of violence continue to come my way, I remind myself over and over again that we have a choice in how we respond to all of this. I know that by feeling hateful in response to hate, I only contribute to the presence of hatred in the world. As an ancient Chinese proverb tells us, quote, "If you decide to pursue revenge, you'd better dig 2 graves." Unquote. I know that I have a choice to see what's good about the world rather than what has gone wrong. When those communiques of violence and hatred come streaming toward me, I push the mute button or even the off button, and I recall what the Dalai Lama once said. Quote, "Compassion and love are not mere luxuries. As the source of both inner and outer peace, they are fundamental to the continued survival of our species." Unquote. Those are extremely valuable words describing our need to be in balance. I stay balanced on this dimension of being in a peaceful world by saying them over and over and over again. I now know for certain that I'm obliged to stay in a consciousness of compassion and love, not only to maintain my own balance, but to help ensure the continued survival of our species. There can be no greater calling. Do you know your past? Do you know where it is? It's only where you think. Do you know that every relationship you have, close your eyes, just close your eyes, just close them. Okay, where's your husband? Where's your wife? Where are your children, your grandchildren? Where's your ex-spouse? They're all in your mind. Open your eyes. Now they're gone. Close your eyes. There they are again.
They're just in your mind. You carry your relationships around in your mind. And if your thoughts about your relationships are on what is wrong, what you don't like, what you hate, what they did to you, that will be your experience. And you will materialize or manifest more and more of that pain into your life. If you look at what you love about them and make that the focus of your attention, that will be the nature of your relationship. It's the greatest secret in making any relationship work. It's so simple. Always focus on what you love if you want that to expand in your life. When you look at someone that you're in a relationship with, look at what you love. Because what you think about is what expands. I'll be talking about that a little bit later on. About not giving energy to the things you don't want. Because what you think about is what expands. And if what you're thinking about what you don't want, then more of what you don't want will just keep showing up. It's the only way it works. So now I'd suggest to everybody in this room and everybody listening that you take an eraser to all of the wounds of your past and you just send them away. And don't make them your calling card anymore. And bring the presence of God to those problems. And the presence of God is nothing more than a higher, faster energy. It's all energy. Everything is energy. As Einstein said, nothing happens until something moves. And spiritual energy is just energy that moves very fast and at very high frequencies. And problematic energy is very slow and very low frequencies. And when high, fast frequencies are put in the face of low, slow energies, they are nullified. They dissipate. They can't survive. There's a song that they sing at a lot of the churches that I speak in. It says, "Surely the presence of God is in this place." It's a great affirmation. Anytime, or the affirmation from A Course in Miracles, I can choose peace rather than this. But surely the presence of God is in this place. Every time that I have a conflict with one of my children or with any place, I just bring that line to bear on what I am experiencing right now. I just bring that line to bear. Surely the presence. Because there's no place that God is not. As the little child in India in the 7th century, who was an avatar, who was really God in a human form, and everywhere he would go, people would be healed just by being in his presence, just like St. Francis. He'd be seen in the village, he'd be seen in the valley at the same time. Lights would emanate from his body wherever he would go, and everyone in the village knew that this was a child of God. This was God in their village without the benefit of an ego. This was an egoless being who had shown up in their village, which is what I believe our great spiritual teachers were. Like there's ways to reach highest levels of consciousness. One of them is to take on an ego and then spend a big hunk of your life seeing if you can shed as much of it as you can. Which has been my path. But there's another one where you just show up and you never take on an ego in the first place. There's only been a handful of those in recorded history. And this little child was one of them. And the elders in the tribe knew that this was God in a human form. And they went up to the little boy and they said to him, trying to bribe him, "I'll give you an orange," they said, "if you can tell me where God is." And the little boy, without hesitating, said, "I'll give you 2 oranges if you can tell me where God isn't." It's one of the very fundamental precepts of this entire program, is that there's only one power in the universe, and that is the power of God. And that whenever we see evil, it's nothing more than love going in the wrong direction, away from its source. And all we have to do is figure out a way to get it to turn around and start returning to its source. Because there's only one power in the universe. And every time we think that we are in something that isn't good, like a problem, like disorder, disharmony, disease, discomfort, what we've done is we've used our mind to create a separation from God. And as long as we are moving away from that source, from that spirit, as long as we're moving opposite of that, those problems continue to manifest. But if we can somehow figure out a way to turn around and move back in that direction, we can eliminate it.